Democratic Alliance Chair, Helen Zille, joins us now. Lovely to be talking with you, Helen. There's so much ground to cover. The world seems to be a very different place from where we were in November with those local elections. But perhaps I'm going to start off with something very different. This morning, we had news from the UK that Peter Hain and Athol Williams had managed to get the British government to ban Bain and Co for 3 years. Now, we know Bain and Co have actually been expanding their operations in South Africa, which seems rather strange given the role that it played in state capture and particularly in SA Revenue Services. Were the coalition to be in power post-2024, if we go 2 years forward, what would happen to a Bain in that kind of a situation? Because it seems at the moment they're just carrying on business as usual.
Well, the bottom line is that politically, a Bain and Co would not be possible in a government in which the DA was a major player. And the reason is that we don't deploy our cadres to places like the South African Revenue Service to do the political bidding of a powerful person in the party. That is completely beyond the pale in the Democratic Alliance. That's why we oppose cadre deployment wherever it is. And once political cadres are deployed into critical positions that should be independent, such as Tom Moyane was in the SA Revenue Service, and then they see an opportunity for a compliant business to do their bidding to achieve the outcomes they want in the South African Revenue Service, that's when you get the conditions created for a Bain and Company. So I would hope that it would not be politically possible under the DA for that to happen at all. If we were to inherit such a situation, well, of course, a company like Bain and Co would be blacklisted immediately.
Yeah, it's strange that it hasn't been. Can the DA do anything in Parliament to bring this to the attention of the ruling party, so at least maybe nudge it in the right way?
Oh, we do all the time. We do nothing else but hold the national government accountable, hold their feet to the fire on every possible issue. With the company called Trillion, with a whole range of companies that have been involved in state capture. It was not only a family business like the Guptas, but several others as well. We saw KPMG and a range of others peripherally involved as well. They knew that they had the inside track with certain deployed ANC cadres in government. They took that, and many businesses were not innocent bystanders. And the Zondo Commission report and the outcome of that, and the drive that we're going to be doing to open this to the bone and get cadre deployment declared unconstitutional, and then dig to the very heart of what went on, I'm sure it has a lot of companies shivering in their boots.
Well, we can't wait to get more information there. Last week, though, I had a fascinating interview with Dr. Frans Cronje. There were a couple of things I'd like you to give me your thoughts on. The first one was that he spent a lot of time talking to ANC voters. And he says they agree that the DA is better than the ANC, does things much better. So there's no more argument on that side. However, they feel that they would lose the little bit that they've gained from the ANC, things like a basic income grant and so on, were the DA to take power.
Well, first of all, the ANC has not offered a basic income grant yet. This is what Cyril is looking at to get himself out of the pala hole. And of course, the minute the ANC is on the back foot, they think, well, let's give another grant. And then they look for ways of handing out the cash to hold their support base. Now, that frankly does not hold water, even though it may be a perception of Black South Africans outside of the Western Cape in some instances. It's not a generalized perception, because where the DA is in government, nobody has lost a child grant, nobody has lost a pension, nobody has lost a disability grant, and nobody lost the 350 Rand relief of distress grant. Absolutely nobody did. And of course, you must understand that the DA is not only governing in the Western Cape now, we govern 40 municipalities, either with an outright majority in 15 of them, or as majority coalitions in 13 of them, or as minority coalitions in 12 of them. And that's an extraordinary footprint across 7 provinces. So there are many, many Black South Africans. In fact, there are 20 million South Africans who are living under some form of DA government right now. And they know, they're not stupid, they know that the DA has not made any move at all to strip them of any grants, and that where the DA governs, there is a higher proportion of free basic services allocated in our budgets because we don't steal the money, which means that there is a lot more left over for service delivery.
It's interesting on that tack. I had a recent discussion with your mayor, the DA mayor of Mgeni, Chris Pappas, who's doing a good job there, but he waved some very strong flags about the way that the ANC reacted there to having lost power. And he said only once he went into government did he realize how much was truly at stake if you were appropriating the power to your own ends. Is this something that we as a country should be preparing ourselves for, or in fact nervous about post-2024?
Well, we've seen these examples all over South Africa, starting in 2006. You'll remember that in 2006, the DA took Cape Town, not as an overall majority, as we've had subsequently, but then back in 2006 as a minority coalition, which meant that all the coalition partners together did not add up to 50% of the seats in the council. So we took that as a minority coalition, and as my book recounts, Not Without a Fight, that particular book, there were 12 different attempts in various ways for the ANC to take us out of government, including changing the system of government that governed Cape Town to get us out of government. Because the ANC knows that as soon as it loses its foothold in government, it loses access to the public's purse and it loses its source of revenue for patronage. It loses the positions to hand around. It loses the tenders and contracts and the stretch cash that it siphons off out of the public purse for various patronage purposes. And so we fought them off in 2006. The final one was a kangaroo court called the Erasmus Commission. They tried to pull that one on us as well. We fought one after the other of those attempts off. But that wasn't the end of them. We've just seen in Nelson Mandela Bay, where we've negotiated a coalition to take the ANC out of power there, literally the day before we signed that coalition agreement, and the signing date was the 28th of July, on the 27th of July, the mayor there, Eugene Johnson, who's still the ANC mayor, received a letter from Ngate, who is the MEC in the province, saying, we are going to change your system of government from an executive mayoral system to an executive committee system in which the ANC would be proportionately represented in the executive committee, and asking for comment on that. So they are seeking to avoid the DA taking power as an executive mayor by changing the system of government, a replay of what we saw in Cape Town. So yes, we have to be prepared for it.
What can you do in Nelson Mandela Bay?
Well, we're going to fight it off again. We're going to say that this is just a cynical ploy to prevent the ANC from being taken out of government, that in fact the courts have said time and again that the solution to problems at local government level is not an intervention from the province. It is the voters of that local government who have to determine through elections and then through by-elections who they want as their government. And if the province doesn't like the results that those elections and the subsequent coalition negotiations throw up, it is not for the province to intervene in a local government. They are distinct spheres of government. The province is not the superior of the local government and may not intervene in that way. And there are plenty of court precedents to that effect, many of which we have driven to the courts, because we had experience of being DA local governments in an ANC-controlled province, as the Western Cape was back then. And we saw that every single time we won at a local government level, the ANC in the province would try to interfere and correct what they considered the mistake of the voters. And we beat that back. And so it's a very important thing that provinces do not get the power to intervene in local governments in the way that the ANC has often done. And I often find myself having to explain that to the DA in local government as well. If they're sitting in a dysfunctional local government in the Western Cape, they come to me and say, oh, we want the province to put us under administration. Now, the province in the Western Cape is now a DA province and has been for many, many years. But I say, no, the solution is not for the province to put you under administration. We have fought that in every other province in the country, saying that that's the way the ANC simply crushes the will of the voters in a particular local government where the ANC is lost. We've fought that all over, and we can't have a double standard. Local government must sort out local government's problems.
Getting back to Frans Cronje's thoughts and his feedback from the focus groups that he's had with ANC voters, he says that they would vote, these ANC voters would vote for the opposition. So on the one hand, they say the DA does a better job. We would vote for them, but the opposition seem to be squabbling too much amongst themselves. And actually, they're no better than the ANC in that regard. Or when they get power, they will be no better than the ANC. That's, again, perhaps a perception, but how do you address it?
Well, each of the parties in the opposition is a different party. And so if a party is squabbling within itself, like Action South Africa is doing, let's say, in KwaZulu-Natal, where Makosi Khoza was fired, and then Musa Kubeka has been fired, and then a third person has been fired, and there's a huge internal war going down, even with people pulling guns on each other, etc., then it is a big turnoff for voters on the party that is squabbling, in that particular case, Action South Africa. But fortunately, the DA's internal squabbles are behind us. We're focused, we're on the road again, we've got a clear vision and a strategy which we're implementing, and each party must be judged on its own merits.
Now, that's an interesting point you've raised about Action SA, because it's likely the way things are going that they would be a coalition partner of yours post-2024. But how do you fight elections, and how do you get your message across when you have these potential allies into the future that you have to deal with at the voting booth?
Well, that is a challenge that faces coalition partners in every part of the world. I mean, I've learned a lot about coalitions from Germany because I went on a coalition study tour of Germany and I learned an enormous amount from them. And they have coalitions, very complex coalitions, very unlikely coalitions. And then the coalition partners at the next election go out and fight each other. And they understand that that is what they do. And they all have a policy position to sell to the voters. And the DA has a very sound policy proposition. We believe that where we have governed, we have shown that it creates greater prosperity for everybody. It's an inclusive approach. And we govern well, we don't steal the money. And life gradually gets better for everybody, and more jobs are created for everybody. And we have many proof points inside the country to demonstrate that. So that is our offer to the voters, that life will get better under a DA government. We are a party for all the people. We're committed to non-racialism, not to this new form of apartheid thinking, which puts race above everything else and somehow presents itself as progressive. We reject that. And we believe in open market economies. We believe in the private sector driving investment and job creation, and the state being highly competent at what it is supposed to do and creating a context in which businesses will invest and grow the economy and create jobs. That is our offer to people. We are trying to apply it wherever we're in government, and where we have an overall majority and don't have to rely on coalition partners, well, it's a lot easier to implement our policies because we don't have to look inwards at holding coalitions together the whole time. But let's take what's going down in Johannesburg right now. We've got the MMC Mbundu being extraordinarily xenophobic and acting outside of what we believe the prescripts of the law are in shutting down small traders. And obviously we can't go with that. Obviously we have to be strongly critical of that, as most other parties are too.
So you'd fight with Action SA on that score, but you might actually be agreeing on most other things.
Well, look, we agree on a lot of overall issues, but we had a strong disagreement on who should be the city manager of Johannesburg. And now Chwani has moved in and taken that outstanding and most experienced manager that exists in the entire South Africa, which initially we felt Johannesburg should have had. And we felt that Action SA was finding spurious and invalid reasons to try and block him from being appointed in Johannesburg. We felt that was most unfortunate. Well, at least Chwani, which is another coalition government, has now got him. But these things aren't petty squabbles. Alec, you've got to understand that. The DA will never have a petty squabble. We have principles and we have values, and we stand firm on them. And those are not petty squabbles. You can't abandon them. You can't abandon your principles and values, because when you hit a wall later down the road, people will say, well, why couldn't you see this coming? And why did you do this expedient thing rather than do the right thing? Often, avoiding a confrontation, even with a coalition party, involves doing something highly expedient and often unprincipled. And that always involves a car crash down the road. Take Quadacoosa. There, Action South Africa wants us to vote the ANC out of power, which we want to do very much. But we're insisting that we first have a proper, written and agreed coalition in place, so that once we vote the ANC out of office, we have an alternative that can be put in place immediately, that we don't leave a vacuum into which we will all have to negotiate with a gun to our heads or face the ANC in the province putting Quadacoosa under administration, which we all know leads to mass looting, as it did in Tshwane a couple of years back when the ANC provincial government put Tshwane under administration and then couldn't account for 4.5 billion rand that somehow vanished in the course of 7 months. Now, we have to learn from those experiences. And we have to say, yes, we are committed to taking the ANC out of government as we are, but all our experiences so far have taught us that before you do that, you get your prospective coalition partners in line, you negotiate a new coalition, it is signed and sealed by the national leadership of the parties involved, and then you can move with confidence into removing the ANC, not leaving a vacuum, and putting a viable alternative in place. We've just done that in Nelson Mandela Bay. In Quadacoosa, Action South Africa unilaterally put in a motion of no confidence. All the other opposition parties were really irritated by that and said, you can't just do that. We need to have a coalition agreement first. They argue, no, we can somehow negotiate a coalition agreement in the vacuum that is left by the ANC being removed from power, which we think has ulterior motives. But be that as it may, we are saying that our experience and our principles tell us that that would be a fatal move. Now, to disagree with Action South Africa on that is not squabbling. It is taking all our accumulated experience and our learnings from having negotiated scores of coalitions and saying, wherever it is feasible and possible, you must have a signed and sealed coalition agreement before you take an existing government out. Otherwise, the result is chaos and usually a suboptimal coalition agreement, if any at all. And usually the result of that is a coalition agreement that merely ends up dividing the senior posts in government between the different parties. That is not what the DA understands as a coalition agreement, not at all. The divvying up of positions in government comes at the very end. First, we have to talk about values and principles to see if there's any foundation, common foundation on which we can build a viable government. Things like the separation of party and state, we take that in the DA as axiomatic. You'll be amazed how many people and many parties have to be taken through that process still in South Africa today. I'm being very honest. I hope I'm not sounding arrogant, but that is an absolute fact. And for us, it is a non-negotiable principle without which our democracy will cease and without which we get phenomena like state capture. That's exactly how state capture happens. because the party first captures the institutions of state because they don't recognize the separation between party and state. And then all business has to do is capture the politicians who've captured the state, and then business has captured the state too. That's how it works. So the separation between party and state is an absolutely pivotal principle on which the DA stands. And there are many others. So we negotiate principles and values first. Then we negotiate a joint governance plan in very broad terms, the key objectives, joint objectives of a coalition government. Then we negotiate all the structures, systems, and mechanisms by which we will manage the coalition, which is separate from managing the government, and all of the processes that we would go through to resolve potential conflicts and dispute resolution mechanisms. Without that, you have no way of resolving the differences that do arise inevitably. And at the very end, when you've done all of that, then you start talking about positions in government. And we will never make the mistake again of believing that coalitions are just divvying up positions, because that is a recipe for disaster.
It's such an interesting process that you've unpacked there about the maturing, perhaps, of this young democracy of ours. And I'm really interested to hear what you make of the by-elections that we've seen since November, starting with the DA, in that you won 2 new seats, but you lost one. The 2 that you won, one in the Northern Cape from the ANC. Take us through that one first, and then we'll go to the others.
Well, by-elections are very important to the DA. We're fighting 2 today, one in Modimolle, which is a very important one for us, and one in Tshwane. So we've got our teams up there doing very hard and very sterling work. Karreeberg, we were very interested in, and we were delighted. Our percentage of the vote literally doubled there. It literally doubled. And the reason was this, and it's a very important reason to understand. In 2021, lots of people voted for a tiny party. By the time we had the by-election, I think it was 6 weeks ago to 2 months ago, they were already so disillusioned with the conflict and the almost disintegration of this tiny party that they all switched their votes to the DA. And they saw the value of having a strong, stable anchor tenant in Karreeberg in the Northern Cape. So that was very, very important. And I'd just like to stand still on this critical point, Alec. Every election, there's a host of new tiny parties. In a local government election, they're often very local. They don't have a presence anywhere else except in that municipality. And these are all new little shiny baubles that pop up. I don't want to be disparaging, but they are new and they are exciting and they offer new hope. And lots of people rush out to vote for them. We've seen that year after year. We saw it with Holomisa's UDM in the 1990s. We saw it with Patricia de Lille's Independent Democrats. We've seen it with Acham. We've seen it with Cope. We've seen it again and again and again, non-stop. And people rush out and vote for this new thing, thinking, well, this is going to be the answer. And then it turns out not to be. But the point that I wanted to make very critically was about these tiny parties. People think that if they vote for a tiny party, there won't be any internal squabbling, there won't be any division. The opposite is true. The very hard lessons that I have learned in all the coalitions that I've negotiated about these tiny parties is the smaller they are, the deeper the divisions internally are. They might come along in a local government election and win 1 or maybe 2 seats at most, but then there are 200 people who want those 2 seats. And then the battles begin. And then the people who didn't get those seats oust through internal processes in that little party. They oust the people who did get that seat. And then the war starts. And then, as the ANC found in Nelson Mandela Bay, because of a war in a tiny party, in fact, 2 tiny parties, they were unable to have a speaker. They were completely unable to govern because a war in a tiny party totally paralyzed that coalition. So small parties do not necessarily offer stability and new hope. They're often built on the back of a local personality or maybe even a national personality who may not have the capacity to build up a viable, strong party with systems, with internal institutions that function, that can work, and that can work internally to resolve internal conflicts. And so often the smaller the party, the deeper the divisions. And that is a paradox that many people in South Africa don't understand. So that was Karierberg.
But Matsikama?
Yes, Matsikama was very interesting. That was a very important ward in Van Reinsdorp in Matsikama. And Van Reinsdorp in Matsikama was an important ward that we lost to the Patriotic Alliance in 2021. And it didn't take their candidate and his colleagues very long to feel disillusioned. I don't need to go into all the details, but one of them came to me and said, Helen, I come from the DA, and there we had systems, we had processes, we had structures, we had all of the things that worked, and if you had disagreements, you could take them up in the systems. He said, here, there's none of that. It's one man's word, and that has to go, and no one is interested in what anybody else has to say on the issue. And so we are never heard, and we are just given instructions. And so we are very disillusioned with that, and we really want to come back to the DA. And now there's a process that you have to undergo to come back to the DA, so we underwent that process, and he came back to the DA. And then somebody called Quito Box, who had been the Patriotic Alliance's candidate in that election, stood for us and swept the board on the argument that the DA, he had experience with the PA, and he was now definitely with the DA and was standing for the DA. And he won a huge and overwhelming majority for the DA, having taken it for the PA just a couple of months earlier. So those were two very, very important by-elections where voters had learned that the grass was not greener on the other side.
It's again,
and came back in large numbers.
Again, part of this whole maturing of the democracy. The other one, the one you lost in Umdoni in KZN.
Umdoni, yes. There in Umdoni, we won by a complete fluke last time. It is a very complex and diverse ward, if I can put it that way, a diverse ward. And we had a large component of a specific vote that got split between Al Jamar and the DA in this last election. In local government elections, the local candidate is critically important. We had what we considered a good candidate, but the Al Jamar candidate, I think, found more resonance in the community, and so our voter base was split there. And the Al Jamar candidate took ours away, then obviously allowing the ANC to win that by-election. And that shows that when the opposition vote gets split amongst a whole lot of tiny parties, the ANC wins. That is just what happens in the vast majority of times.
Thanks for bringing us up to date with all of that as well. The two that you're contesting today, so that we understand a little more background on them?
Well, in both of them were DA wards. In Modimolle Mokgopong, very sadly, our councillor, who was a good councillor, had a fundamental change in her personal life circumstances and moved out of Modimolle Mokgopong to another province, and obviously then had to resign her seat, resulting in the by-election. We've got a very good local candidate there. His name is Wits Botha, who is standing for us there, lots of experience, very big activist, often goes around collecting refuse that isn't collected by the municipality in his own private car and trailer, that kind of hands-on guy. So he's our candidate there. It is crucial that we win that ward, and because we want to remain in power in Modimolle Mokgopong. That is one of our two local governments where we have a mayor in Limpopo, which is extraordinary. We have a mayor in Modimolle Mokgopong, a very, very energetic and can-do mayor. Her name is Marlene van Staden, and she's there as our mayor. We're wanting to keep her there. And if we win this by-election, it will be an even split in the council, and I'm afraid the mayoralty will again have to be decided on a coin toss because there'll be a dead even split. Marlene has managed to win a coin toss before. Now she's just got to win another one, but we first have to win this by-election. That's how close it gets in all of these circumstances. And in Tabazimbi, we've got the very wonderful, experienced Toki Swanepoel. She is our mayor there, a very can-do, motherly type of person who gets on with everybody, but is facing huge pushback and major, major difficulties, obviously with the divisions amongst the opposition, but she's firm at the moment and making great progress there.
Well, and when we just to close off with, look ahead to 2024, how might the country be different under a not ANC government, under a coalition government?
Well, that's a huge question, Alec, and if you want me to answer it properly, I will answer it properly. I'd thought a lot about Nelson Mandela Bay because that gives us a foretaste of what could possibly be South Africa's future. And it is not as rosy as some people tend to make out. There's this notion, and I've heard it in your interviews before from some of your interviewees, that all we have to do is get rid of the ANC and South Africa will be on the road again. Investment will pour in, the economy will grow, government will improve, etc., etc. I say, Hokaai. I'm also a great optimist about South Africa. I work day and night for South Africa to work, and that means getting the DA into government. While there is a very good chance that the ANC will fall under 50% nationally and in at least 3 provinces, we must be very wary of thinking that it'll be easy to set up an alternative. Let me look at Nelson Mandela Bay. There are 13 parties got seats in council. They have a 120 seat council. They have a 120 seat council. So 61 votes constitutes an overall majority. 61 votes is the magical 50% plus 1 that you always go for. The DA got 48 seats. We were the biggest party in Nelson Mandela Bay. Followed by the ANC, but because of the proportional representation system, even though they got 39% and we got 40%, they got the next seat on the remainder, and we both ended up with 48 seats in the 120 seat council. So with 48 seats, to get to 61, we needed 13 more seats. To get to that, we needed 9 other tiny parties. 1-person, 2-person, majority 3-person parties out of 120. And we needed 9 of them. And they all held the balance of power. And they could all withdraw at any time and switch governments. So a person who gets in on a fraction of a percent of the vote, simply by deciding to switch from the ANC to the DA or from the DA to the ANC, can bring down the government. And when there are 9 such parties, you have to realize how inherently unstable the government is. And we warned people about that beforehand. We said, look, we're not here to disparage tiny parties, but we're here to warn you, and warn you honestly, that once you have to go into coalition with 9 parties, tiny parties, each of which may have got in on a fraction of a percent of the vote, and they can actually bring down the government, you are building fundamental instability into your system, which is terrible, because then the government has to look inwards all the time to try and stay in power, to try and hold on to government, rather than looking outwards at the voters, rather than delivering on their mandate. Anyway, in their wisdom, the voters of Nelson Mandela Bay, as is their right, and I'm not criticizing voters, they can vote for whoever they like, we point out the consequences, and we have a right and a duty to do that as well. And so they ended up with a situation which was ungovernable. The ANC got those partners in first. I was sort of half relieved that I didn't have to deal with that immediately after the 2021 election, dealing with all the other coalition governments we were negotiating. But of course, it came crashing down. And because of the huge fight in the Northern Alliance, they didn't even have a speaker. And because they didn't have a legitimate speaker, somehow, in between the chaos of different council meetings, they managed to select 2 competing municipal managers. And then there was a total crash in the administration because no one knew who the municipal manager was. And there was an internal war in the administration between the supporters of Municipal Manager A and Municipal Manager B, and nothing happened. And because of the war inside various parties, and it wasn't only the Northern Alliance, it was various other tiny localized parties, that it made it completely ungovernable. It made it paralyzed government. And then they were facing this water crisis at the same time and various other things. And there they had a complete paralysis in government. And that is when the smaller parties came to us and said, we can't do this anymore. There's total paralysis in government. The ANC is continuing to abuse the state by not recognizing the separation between party and state. We want to come over to the DA. And it took us months and 8 rounds of negotiation to get a coalition agreement. And it is not a majority coalition agreement because I was not prepared to bring in chronically divided parties into that coalition. We got a coalition agreement signed by national leaders, where there are national leaders of those political parties, to put us into government with a firm coalition agreement. I can't guarantee it will definitely work. It is the very best chance that we have. It is the best chance that we have, but we couldn't leave the voters of Nelson Mandela Bay in the paralysis and state of collapse that all of those contesting tiny coalition parties had landed it in. So when we say to voters, the choice is between the DA and the ANC, we know what we're talking about. And when we say to voters, you are absolutely free to vote for whoever you like. This is the reason why we believe you should vote DA. We have a proven track record. We know what we're doing in government. You can compare where the DA governs to where the ANC governs. You can see that it is better for all the people to have DA in government. And if you want stable government, you need a strong anchor tenant, even in a coalition. You need a strong, stable anchor tenant that knows what it's doing. And that is the DA. And that is why we keep on telling that to people. So our coalitions are maturing, but in national government, what if the ANC falls to 46%? And now we have a whole slew of independent candidates standing, each of which may get in on a fraction of a percent of a vote into national parliament. And the ANC then can make up the balance and get 50% plus one with a slew of tiny parties or independent candidates. Do you think that will lead to greater stability? Or will we just be replicating what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay in the country as a whole?
Sure. You know, and
That does not augur well for stability. That is why, it's not a panacea to have a whole lot of independent candidates. And as I wrote on my Facebook page the other day, if you think that independent candidates are all going to be these fine, upstanding people standing for the electorate and wanting to be out there to advance the interests of the electorate without being beholden to a political party, well, some may well be, and I hope they are. But in many cases, politics in South Africa is about people standing to get elected to get access to resources of the state, either to enrich themselves or to enrich their patronage network. And there is no reason why independence in the main should be any different. And so what we could end up with is a Nelson Mandela Bay instability, inability to form a coherent government, internal squabbling at a national level. And that is not going to be in South Africa's interest. That's why we're saying to people, political parties have their challenges, of course they do. But the one party that has the potential and the ability to overcome its challenges because of really strong internal institutions, good vision, good plan, good leadership, good structures, and all of the things we talk about, that is the anchor tenant that is needed. And the stronger we are, the better the prospects for stable, good government.
You know, in the investment world, they talk about level one thinking of people who maybe see a share that they quite like and then go and buy it, or buy it on a superficial reason. And then level two thinking, where you do proper analysis. And I think you've given us some level two thinking on the political front today. Thank you, Helen Zille, Chair of the Democratic Alliance. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.